Hello everyone, welcome to Zoka. Can I invite both gentlemen to give a short introduction about yourself and let us get to know you a bit more. Start with Clifton and then with Dan.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Clifton Phua. My last name is not that easy to pronounce. I am from IMDA. IMDA stands for Infocom Media Development Authority. So I'm from the Singapore government. And what IMDA does is that we are architects of Singapore's digital future. So we help organizations here become successful using digital technologies. Before IMDA, also maybe I should say what I do in IMDA. So at IMDA, I look after labs. So I work on emerging technologies, such as AI governance. I look after robotics transformers, which are robotics, and also I look after green computing and other emerging technologies. Before IMDA, I was at different organizations, but I was a data scientist, I was an AI scientist for about 15, 16 years. And my PhD is also in this space. And I look forward to this conversation with Dan and Angie.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Klein. I have 3 hats at Zulka. So I am, as previously introduced, the Chief of Data and AI. I also look after what we do here in Asia, and I look after what we do in the UK as well. A little bit about me. I graduated in 1993 in a very little known subject at the time, Bayesian Markov chains, and I was doing computer vision when nobody knew what it was. Nobody thought it was remotely interesting. So I've had a fairly varied career through all sorts of things, including cars, planes, trains and automobiles, and big enterprise systems, and inside the British government for a decent length of time, looking at how the government in the UK does things. So I hope some of the experiences tonight that I can share with you, you find interesting. Angie.
Great, thank you very much, both to Clifton and Dan. I think I'd like to call upon Dan really to start the evening, if you could. I guess first thing we wanted to understand from Dan is like when this evening we're going to talk about data ecosystem, but we'd like to understand with what do we mean by data ecosystem?
Okay, thank you, Angie. Right, so I'm going to get on my feet for this because I present better when I'm standing up. So when we set this event up, we were very conscious that we've used the word the words data ecosystem. So for a little bit of context so that we can get everybody in the room understanding what Clifton and I are about to have a conversation about. What is data ecosystems? Well, let me start by explaining what it isn't. It isn't a data platform. There's lots of data platforms out there. What it is when multiple organizations, multiple legal entities, multiple commercial organizations, and multiple government departments have data that needs to stay within their department or their organization, but they want to be able to share data. So you have a situation where you need to create access to that data in a very controlled way, probably in a regulated way even, so that you can create benefit. And that benefit probably has a higher purpose. So you'll see here on the slide, there's 4 key things to a data ecosystem. It's about collaboration. It's about shared value between organizations. It's about multiple legal entities. It's about the shared responsibility to treat that data well, so the ethics side of it. And it probably has to have a higher purpose. So in the retail space, for example, you could imagine multiple retailers and multiple brands come together because they want to do something different. They want to think about how the retail environment works in a better way. Equally, population health. You could imagine hospitals coming together with doctors' surgeries, with pharmacies, to solve population health problems. You can also get into the energy sector as well. You can think about how does the energy sector come together to decarbonize, okay? So, very briefly, what needs to be considered when you think about a data ecosystem? So there are 5 key principles inside doing a data ecosystem. It has to be shared. You have to think about what is the information model that people understand across all the entities that are involved. They have to understand it. There has to be trust, and that trust has to be underpinned by a legal framework. Now, that legal framework could be set by a regulator, potentially. And this is where, and then it gets really interesting. Then you have to make sure you've got your consent solved. And consent here, this is the important bit, is it's not about privacy consent, because actually a lot of organizations have got privacy consent solved. This is about commercial consent, because I now have to have the commercial consent between many commercial organizations and government departments sharing the data. And then, because this isn't about moving the data around, it's about access. So you now, this is the 4th point, you now have to curate. How do you create that access? How do you make it available? How do you make it work? How do you make it easy for somebody to come and find the data, discover it, and link it to some other data set? So you have to curate that experience, if you like, a service layer. And then you probably have to put some tech in there, because you probably need some temporary computing, some temporary storage, right? Which is the data clean rooms concept. So that's it from me. I just wanted to set some context. I think healthcare, population healthcare, really obvious example. Interestingly, in this space, it tends to be very wealthy benefactors. So you could imagine Bill and Melinda Gates, they're interested in population health around the world. They want to create a data ecosystem. If we move on to, I'm going to pick Louis Vuitton here, but Louis Vuitton, really good example. We have something coming out of Europe, which is the electronic product passport, sorry, the digital product passport coming out of Europe in the regulations, 2025. It's going to have an impact on the entire global supply chain, including manufacturing facilities here in APAC. Why? Because the leather has to be proven to source. And in the regulations, they are going to have to prove down to the cow, which cow the leather came from, which tannery it went through, how was it sold. So it starts to get really interesting when you look at an entire manufacturing supply chain. How is the industry going to do it? And a final example is then the decarbonisation. The UK, as an example, 126 organisations in the UK have come together to specifically look at how they solve the decarbonisation problem in the UK, and they're going to have to redesign the entire energy grid. And so with that, I'm going to stop and open it up. Angie. Oh, this is a bit of shameless from me, I think, isn't it? No, this is the Slido. Right,
Yep.
Cool.
Great. So I just want to remind the audience here is that there is a Slido to send in your questions, so that as you listen to the discussion and conversations, feel free to actually enter your questions, and we'll take it at the end of the sessions, some of the questions that you have for the speakers here. All right, great. I'll give you a bit of moment to scan the QR codes. And if you missed it, perhaps at the end of the session, we would flash it again. All right, I've never seen myself being helped with the mobile devices right in front of me as though I'm a superstar. Thank you, thank you. All right. Okay, so now thank you very much, Dan, for sharing with us what does data ecosystem mean in Zolka, and of course also some of the examples that we shared as well in the transformative examples that we're looking at. Now, Clifton, I think it's no stranger. You mentioned that we architect the digital economy in Singapore, right?
Yes.
And ecosystem is definitely not a stranger to you. It's at the heart of what IMDA does as well to drive this digital economy. I'd like to hear from you, where do you see the definition here that you have actually exposed, and what are some of the new business models or transformative changes that you've seen in part of that collaboration?
Thank you for that question. So I repeat the question again. It's how we have influenced new business models and strategies, and how these transformative changes have emerged from these ecosystems. So I think there are a few that I would like to share. The first, for innovative changes, will be one is from product to platform. So these days, instead of just selling the platform, you will actually be eventually providing, instead of selling the product, you'll be actually getting the platform. So one example that I can give is fitness trackers. Fitness trackers feeding data to personalized health apps. So it leads to a whole ecosystem of services. There's also hyper-personalization. So you'll be familiar with Amazon and Lazada and different e-commerce apps that once you use it for a while, you'll be able to understand your browsing behavior, your purchase patterns, and recommend to you new products and new services. Another form of innovation is also in predictive AI. You'll be familiar with organizations being able to do a propensity to buy. So they would know whether you're likely to buy a certain product. They would cross-sell and upsell you new products. And these days, there's also generative AI. So depending on the organization, whether you run a call center, whether you have a team of developers, you'll be using generative AI as a strategy for staying ahead of the curve. So I think that's how data ecosystems are shaking things up and fostering new business models and strategies.
Wow. I mean, just hearing from you and Dan, right? We all know, I think all of us here comes from organizations, institutions, understand the value of data. It doesn't need to be pitched. People, there's a quote that says that data is the new oil. But the challenge is also that creates a lot of silos. And my questions that I have here for both gentlemen here is, I really want to understand in reality, right? What are the real challenges when you really want to make an effective data ecosystem, when you want to really implement and harness the value of such an approach? Because you are talking about at the institution to institution level, at the national level, and also at a cross-border and international level. Start with Dan.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Let me try and bring this to life with an example, if I may. Let's talk about what happens if you silo things. So, situation in the UK, there's a rollout of EV chargers in the UK. Excellent, everybody says, great, EV chargers going all over the country. Well, we have a situation in Scotland where a number have been placed and they cannot be switched on. And the reason they cannot be switched on is because the electricity, the national provider of electricity, cannot get the electricity to the place where the EV charger is. And then they've worked out that the business case to deliver the electricity to this one charger is going to be £100,000 for the one charger. Now, why did that occur? That occurred because they were siloing their data and they didn't look at what the electricity grid placement looked like, what the usage of the energy was in that grid, and where they were placing the chargers. It sounds stupid, doesn't it? But this is the point about the energy sector coming together and saying, we need to be sharing this data. Is that a good example for you, Angie?
Yes, indeed. And what about Clifton? Clifton, on your end here, you mentioned that it takes a shift from product to platform, and of course it turns on new business strategies with all the emerging technology. I really want to know from you as well in terms of what are the challenges that you have encountered or faced and see that happening.
In terms of breaking down silos, I think in order to do that, there is also the need to focus on interoperability. So in many cases, the data that is from different organizations are quite different. So they need to have a data standard in order to combine the data together. And also, I think they have to be quite clear on what are the new business models or business models that they are adopting in order to come together to work together.
Now, I think at the beginning of the session, Dan mentioned something around, and he talks about the complexities of really bringing all the organizations together, and he spoke about a commercial consent. Now, Dan, how can organizations really navigate the complexities of this data sharing agreements between these institutions at the same time, and foster that collaboration, harness that value, same time that they are not going to compromise the competitive advantage, because we are living in a very competitive world.
Yeah, so let me try and give you a retail example, and this retail example is how it unlocks innovation at the same time. So we've had a study that has just finished in the UK. It was led by one of the universities in the UK. It was led by some medical researchers. And they wanted to bring together data from two retailers, Tesco's and Boots, who are two big retailers, and Boots is here, so you know them, but Tesco's and Boots. And they wanted to bring it together with the pharmaceutical companies. And they wanted to bring it together to look for markers for cancer. So this is now retail data being looked at as a marker for early diagnosis of cancer. The commercial consent was that you actually have two competing pharmaceutical companies and you have two competing retailers. What the university did was it got the personal consent from the 500 people that were involved in the study. So that bit was easy because the personal consent was there. And it was all using the Boots loyalty card and the Tesco's loyalty card, okay? But now you're having to get the commercial consent between two pharmaceutical companies that compete and two retailers that compete, and the academics are needing to look at that data in a way that doesn't break the competition problems. Now, the great news is at the back of that study, they discovered that the drug Gaviscon provides an 8-month lead time on the diagnosis of ovarian cancer in women. That's mind-blowing. That's what happens when you start bringing this data together at scale. But would the retailers have predicted that how people buy Gaviscon is an 8-month lead time on predicting ovarian cancer? This is one of the things where you start unlocking the innovation really heavily. Does that help answer it, Angie?
Yep. And both yourself, Clifton, and yourself has mentioned about interoperable of data, and you shared about the commercial consent to get the data sharing happening. But I do have a question in terms of how do you, is there any best practices, right, in terms of ethically curating the data access and usage now, and to ensure that all the stakeholders in this ecosystem has a mutual benefits and fairness?
Okay, so for IMDA, we do have a strong emphasis on data ethics and protection. The first is privacy by design. So we propose to embed privacy safeguards from the outset. So think of data anonymization techniques, strong access controls, and we do have a framework which is called the Personal Data Protection Framework, PDPA. Also, we do propose that also you do purpose limitation. What that means is that be clear about why data is collected and how it aligns with the broader goals of the ecosystem. Avoid data hoarding without a clear benefit. There is also informed consent, which was mentioned earlier, obtain meaningful consent from individuals. And the last that we have is algorithmic fairness, which means to actively audit algorithms for bias to ensure they don't lead to discriminatory decisions.
Great. Thank you very much, Clifton. What about you, Dan? Is there a view in terms of how do we ethically curate the data access, ensure there's mutual benefit among the parties, and fairness as well?
So I think a lot of it is transparency. Okay, so the big conversation is how do you enshrine transparency into the way people use and access the data? And what you've got to, when you do a data ecosystem, one of the crucial things you add to it in the curation layer is this idea of publishing for peer review the things that you have discovered, so that you get buy-in from all the participants in the ecosystem, so you're sharing the methods that you use, the mathematical methods that you're using, and you provide that transparency for all participants. And some of the ecosystems out there are open ecosystems, so members of the public can get involved. Some of them, like the energy sector one, is a closed ecosystem. But you have to create transparency between the people that can get involved in the ecosystem so that they keep that trust.
At this point, I would like to say that the purposes of collecting and curating data is, most of the time, the real purpose is to do AI. So what I want to say here is that the best practice for ethical curation of data is also related to ethical AI development, as seen in various kinds of AI principles, such as those from OECD. So here in Singapore, we do have our model governance framework. It was first released in 2019 for predictive AI. And this year in January, just 2 months ago, we released Model Governance Framework 2.0, and this includes generative AI. So while it started in 2019, in 2022, we decided to create our own toolkit. And this toolkit is actually the world's first AI governance testing framework. It ensures that the data, the models align with ethics, specifically with our principles. There are 11 principles in our model governance framework, but our toolkit focuses on just 3 of them. So the first is fairness, the second is explainability, and then the third is robustness. And last year, we decided to set up a foundation, which is called the AI Verify Foundation. And that we aim to bring in open source developers around the world to work together with us to develop AI Verify. So we are about to release our generative AI toolkit, which is for benchmarking and for red teaming. So we welcome everyone, including Zulka, to be part of our movement.
Sounds exciting, Dan.
Well, and I think we're responding to your consultation exercise here in Singapore at the moment, aren't we? So the other thing I would add, we have a very significant view on bias and how bias comes about in machine learning, deep learning, and LLMs. And because of the nature of what Zulka does, so we have specialists not only in AI, deep learning, machine learning, and LLMs, but we also have specialists in cryptography and security by design. So we take a view that there is a very important area, which is how do we reverse engineer test the entire area for things like bias and potentially bad actors who might be wishing to mistrain large language models and mistrain deep learning models, and they're very difficult to spot. And for us, that's an entire area where there's a huge crossover between the crypto community, the security community, and our data scientists. But as I say, that's something we're responding to the Singaporean government on as we speak.
Yes, and indeed, for the benefits of the audience, Minister Josephine Teo, I believe, has actually published a paper to actually seek for international feedback on the framework that has been launched, and we are certainly looking into that as well. But then I think, coming back to it, I think evidence and is essentially really important to really coin what we are basically saying in some of those bias and of course from the learning of our clients. And we have worked in highly regulated space in Zulka. I'd like to basically invite you to share with us what kind of mechanisms can be put in place really to ensure this ongoing transparency and ethical data usage based on what we have done in the UK with a highly regulated government agency.
So I think one of the challenges particularly for the large language models, is the idea of reproducibility. So if we look at how, let's say, we get involved in machine learning algorithms in a healthcare setting. In healthcare, if we need to create a class 1 medical device for use by doctors, we have to be able to show to the regulator the reproducibility of the results of the machine learning. But by definition, this is a machine that learns. So how do you show the inner workings? Do you give them the entire history of every single piece of data that's ever been put on that machine? And this is where you have to build the mathematics to then provide the confidence to any regulator, not just in healthcare, to show that it's within the bounds that you expect it to be within, and that you're not having hallucinations, you're not having overfits, underfits. That is a challenge for any regulator in any of the sectors. And it's the demonstration of it and the transparency of what algorithms are in play. And one of the challenges we all have with LLMs is there isn't the transparency potentially for the mathematics in the core of the LLM. And that is challenging all governments around the world and all commercial organizations as well. Clifton, go on.
Yes, I agree with you. But I think there's also early work in this space. There is some work by Anthropic in mechanistic interpretability. That's really hard for me to say that. But I think there's early work to show, for example, based on the outputs from the prompts, which parts of the LLM actually fires or activates. But it's very, very early work. Yeah.
Right. So talking about early work, I guess, looking ahead, right? What do you think? How is it taking shape in the future of data and the usage of data and ecosystems? What are the emerging trends that you guys have been talking about? What are the key, maybe you can summarize the key trends that we're looking at, and how should the organization really prepare to adapt to these changes?
Yeah, I think there are many emerging technologies that come out. I think one that's not so emerging is blockchain. It's been around for a while. But basically, it ensures that there is traceability, then your data is authenticated, and so on. Then I think in the generative AI space is very hot, but we do see that there are some new trends. For example, the models can become smaller, so they become more green and more focused on specific types of problems. These are called small language models. And I think also there's multimodal large language models. And you can see from Sora and those text-to-image kind of LLMs. So I think in the generative AI space, there's a lot of fast-moving kind of technologies. And then there are others like quantum AI and so on.
So I think my answer is going to be slightly different. I'm going to be slightly counterculture tonight. There is quantum. There has been blockchain for a bit. Gen AI is here. But I'm going to suggest to the audience tonight that the biggest trend in the next few years is everybody getting their house in order to be able to use all these new technologies. If the data's not in a great place in your existing organization, whether it's a government department or a commercial organization, frankly, you're not going to be using any of these new technologies. And if you do, they'll probably fail. So I'm going to be really provocative and say the new trend is to go back and replace all your old stuff and sort it out. Angie, or Clifton.
Oh, yes. So I think that there are certain areas whereby this is really required. So I think in Singapore, we have a platform for trade, finance, and supply chain. So we call it SG Trade X, where you can have data from a logistics company, from a transportation company, from a maritime transport company, all data to be put together to solve trade, finance, and supply chain problems. We do see such ecosystems in finance as well. There's a SG Findex. I think that's a consumer-based benefit. So you would see that right now, we bank with a certain bank, but you can see your data from other banks and other insurance companies. So these are many areas whereby we really achieve early success, and we are looking at other industries, other problems to solve.
Great. Now I'd like to perhaps open the questions to the floor. We have questions from the Slido for the panels. Okay, so I'm going to read out the questions. This is the part that Angie's just going to use a cheat code for that. One of the biggest challenge we face is that there are too many sources of data with different owners. All these data owners don't want to work with each other. So how do we solve this challenge?
So I'm going to say it's very simple. It's not very simple, but if I go back to the slide, the very first slide I put up, you have to have a higher purpose. You have to have something that all the parties involved want to get involved in. Or, potentially, you have a regulator tell them they have to get involved in, and it'll become part of their license conditions. But you have to give them a reason to get to be involved. Otherwise, it's human nature. If they're motivated to do something else, they'll do something else.
All right, and second ones that I have here is, who benefits more from the data ecosystem? Is it the enterprises or the individual consumer, customer, or patient?
I think the answer is it depends on what type of industry, what kind of use cases we want to solve. So earlier I mentioned SG TradeX is actually a data ecosystem for enterprises. So if you contribute data, then you are also you can also benefit from the data that's in the data ecosystem. And then the other one I mentioned, which is SG Findex, it's for consumer to share, to extract their data from other banking institutions into a single bank where you can have a bird's eye view of your financial health. So it really depends. Yeah.
I would answer it very simply and say society. Honestly speaking, if we want to solve it, if we as a collective society want to solve climate change, we are going to have to share data in an ecosystem model. If we want to improve the global population of this planet, we are going to have to share data in an ecosystem model.
Yeah, so someone wise once told me, trust is earned in drops but lost in buckets. So it takes time, patience, collaboration to build trust. But I also think that sometimes we can solve this using technologies. There are different technologies out there, sandboxes out there whereby you can try and share data in a confidential way. So for example, there are things such as privacy enhancing toolkits. IMDA actually has a sandbox, and we welcome anyone to participate in our sandbox to try that out. And then there are things like secure multi-party computation, federated learning, and different technologies that you can use.
So I'm going to give a slightly different answer. The automation of legal departments. Legal departments in most organizations are notoriously paper heavy. The automation of their contract mechanisms is incredibly valuable when it comes to commercial consent, because I can then automate the contract that the legal departments sign between each other and the way that flows through to a data contract that lives inside an ecosystem. And then I can show lineage, I can show provenance, and I can provide the auditors with the confidence that the data is safe.
We are good on time. I just want to make sure. All right, so we go on to the next question here. And I think Clifton has made a good point that IMDA has made good progress with the banking and finance. We have that collaboration, be able to see across. what are the other industries that are making good progress with building a well-used and well-accessed data ecosystem?
IMDA cannot claim that we made good progress in banking and finance because that's under MES, but we do work very closely with MES, which is the banking and insurance regulator here in Singapore. I think there are a few examples I can give. So other than trade and supply chain, we do have a very good data ecosystem with the building and construction industry. So building developers, building owners, they contribute data, and then there are the data users, engineers, architects, solution developers. Then there are organizations that use data that's contributed to the data ecosystem to do resource allocation, maintenance schedules, and so on. This is just one of the many examples. There are those that are for green data sharing as well. I think there's a company called greenprint.ai, and they aggregate data from different organizations, and they share that amongst many others as well.
Do you see any other industries internationally, Dan, besides from the point of view, that really make good progress in using?
So I certainly think, it's subjects that are very close to my heart, but there is a lot of work in Europe, in particular around health, and the sharing of data within the health communities across Europe, across the nations within the continent of Europe. I think the UK is reasonably ahead when it comes to energy. It's widely recognised as probably being furthest down the road in terms of decarbonisation of the infrastructure, and that only comes about because they've got good data sharing. I have to say though, in the UK, the way they've done that is the regulator has forced it. So to be clear, the British government has taken a view of being very heavy on the regulation with the energy companies to make sure that they can actually change the way the network works.
Just to add on a few more examples that are international and movement-led, there's one which is for healthcare. That's the Human Cell Atlas. So researchers come in and contribute data on human cells. There's also one that you'll be familiar with, which is OpenStreetMap. So people just openly contribute it, like just how they contribute to Wikipedia.
And you've just reminded me of one other, which is there's an entire international organisation that works with the biodiversity of species. So you can go and find all the species data on the planet, and it's sourced from all the local, whether it's volunteer organisations or national bodies or foundation trusts, species data for all the animals and plants, both on the land and in the sea, is now heavily recorded and publicly available.
Now the next question is pretty interesting, right? Because we spoke about Gen AI and large language models, and obviously the name suggests that you need to have enough and large enough data model for you to train on. And that's kind of create a huge concern here in this question. How should we address the growing concern of data monopolies by the tech giants?
I don't have an answer, the answer to this question, but I can answer it from the point of view how we grow our own data ecosystem unique to our circumstances, which the big tech may not have access to. So as you know, Southeast Asia, we have our own unique languages, our culture. So one movement that we are part of is we have a national multimodal large language model program, which means that we build our own LLM using our own data on Southeast Asia. So we are actually now collecting the data, inviting everyone that has data to come, unique data in Southeast Asia to come on board. Right now, we have quite a few members and participants. I'll give you a few examples, like museums, libraries, associations in Southeast Asia that are contributing in different languages. So there's Tamil, there's Bahasa Indonesia, and others. So we're learning a lot from this new data ecosystem that we're setting up. And it's not accessible by big tech at this moment. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I take it, I have to admit to being a European here, so I do believe in regulation. I do believe regulation is really quite important in this space. Antitrust laws aside, there still needs to be some level of regulation, particularly around things like ethics. I'm also, just if I may, reflect on what we mean by big monopolies. And I'm reflecting on Facebook in particular, or Meta. Why do I reflect on Meta? If Meta stops being relevant because we stop using Instagram and we stop using Facebook, their data stops being relevant as well. So I just reflect on that. Now, I'm aware Google is still being used by absolutely everybody, the other big monopoly potentially. But just think that through. If Facebook and Instagram stop being relevant, their data is no longer relevant to anybody either, because it goes out of date really quickly. So I do have some faith in human society that if the regulation doesn't work, at some point we will give up on the likes of Facebook and Instagram.
Right. Now, talking about regulators, the questions here is centering around regulators are getting left behind by the pace of this development in data sharing and AI. Do you agree, and what do you think?
I am from the regulator, the IT regulator.
Right.
And I think the philosophy and ethos that we have is we try to run as fast as we can, but the technology is so fast. Every week, every day, there's something new. We're trying to learn more about it. We're trying to engage the big tech. And we are coming up with policies. A lot are in draft. We're coming with new technologies that, like for example, AI Verify and others that we hope can be of use to our companies here.
So I'm big fan of regulation. Obviously, we have the AI Act in EU now in force, which is interesting. I think the regulators, in some senses, are between a rock and a hard place. They are not the technologists on the front line. So the question is, do they understand it? The other question is, when they then write the legislation, how enforceable is it? Or, as in the case of the AI Act in the EU, have you put the emphasis back on the developer who's developing the LLM? And does that cause a problem for society in terms of trust? My own view, when it comes to the regulation of it, is that actually governments around the world have existing regulation that's on the books, and they should be much tougher in their enforcement. Because actually the enforcement would start to really clarify what's going on. Do I think we need new regulation? Possibly. But I think increased enforcement would at least test what we currently have and really understand. When I see the EU enforce things, that actually makes me more excited than if I see a new piece of regulation come along.
All right, so next question, we see some interest in people looking at how do we put together a data ecosystem and who is the typical stakeholder or entity that would lead the design of such and the characteristics of this entity needs.
That's okay, Clifton. I think in my experience, speaking very personally now, regulators, that's definitely one group of stakeholders that like data ecosystems. The other one is NGOs, so non-governmental organizations, and or philanthropists. So it is really interesting watching the Ashton Foundation, another philanthropist set up, or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The philanthropists are definitely active when it comes to ecosystems, but then so are the regulators. The main one is that they have a higher purpose, it's to answer your question directly. If you think about what the Gates Foundation is about, it's a higher purpose of solving global health. If you think about what a regulator is trying to do, they're probably trying to make the market, whether that's the energy market, whether that's the food standards market, they're probably trying to make the market work. So they have a higher purpose for what they're trying to do.
Just following up, I know this next sequence was a question on Gen AI, but just because we're on that topic on higher purpose, there is a question that is saying that even with the government, oh no, where is it? It has put together. The data is siloed. So what is the higher purpose that helps them to bring it together? That's you haven't answered one, but how do they actually do that? And what is that definition? Yeah, give them a higher purpose. What would give them a higher purpose? A mission? A larger mission than the organization, right?
Yes, and if it's within a government and you've got silos within a government, then the higher purpose is how that government improves the society of the citizens. And if you've got a government being siloed in its data, it probably needs to think about how it seeks to solve the societal problems. And they will cut across different departments, as is fairly normal. Clifton?
Yes, I mean, I can think of specific examples that in Singapore, we do have a data exchange framework that we use internally. We do have governance frameworks internally as well. Yeah.
Angie, I will also make a comment. The UK government actually regulated in 2017 something called the Digital Economy Act, specifically to get government departments to share data between themselves. And they forced the issue because they realised that a number of government departments weren't playing ball with each other. And particularly when it comes to tax returns against welfare payments, which is one of the really big areas where there's data sharing between the tax department and the welfare department, they had to force it with regulation in the Digital Economy Act 2017.
All right. Next, a quick one from, we're back to Gen AI. Please share your perspective of how Gen AI will change the landscape of data ecosystem in the near future.
I think this is a very interesting question because there's of course existing data out there to train the LLMs already. Some of you might be familiar, like Web 1, Web 2, Books 1, Books 2. And then now there is also synthetic data for certain types of use cases. You would generate and then you use them, add them to your data ecosystem. Yeah, so I think the types of artificial AI-generated data would change the landscape in the near future. What I've learned also is that there's very important need to make the distinction between the human-generated data and the AI-generated data and ensure that they don't mix with each other. If some AI data is contaminated with the human-generated data, you cause the models to work very, very badly. Yeah. So I think Gen AI would ensure that you need to keep both types of data quite separate in the future.
So I think I'm going to build on that and say that probably in 2024, the area of maximum impact around this whole area of Gen AI and data ecosystems is actually going to be around the elections that we've got throughout the world with misinformation and disinformation. And if I'm building on Clifton's point, it's the combination of human-generated data and AI-generated data. But actually, probably the biggest thing for 2024 is the impact it has on how people perceive how they should vote. And of course, voting matters. So in terms of the global ability to protect the societies that we all care about, I think that's probably the biggest area for us.
And I also like to add that because there's the situation where there's a need to label Gen AI data, so you see provenance, content provenance become a very hot topic right now. You see that C2PA, which is a standard, which is to embed metadata or manifest into AI-generated information like images and videos, so that people can differentiate that they are actually AI-generated.
Thank you. The next question is that would there ever be a case where there's a large collaboration collaborative ecosystem between the government and the commercial entities because they have different mandates. And I think you did touch a little bit about it earlier.
Well, I'll talk straight to that because I was involved in it. So the answer is one of the biggest data ecosystems that nobody's ever heard of is actually with the United Nations. And I was involved in the creation of it. The United Nations has done something really impressive. 184 countries around the world have come together and they have got a data ecosystem of the 13 largest data sets on the planet. That includes every single mobile phone transaction anywhere in the world. It also includes all the satellite data, it includes all the LiDAR data, it includes population movement on transportation. It was heavily used in COVID because you can look at population movement really rapidly at a global scale. I was lucky enough working in the environmental side of it to work with two amazing data scientists in Kigali, in Rwanda, and they were using it to predict on a daily basis the growth of crops in fields in Rwanda. They built their model, they tested it with field officers who went actually to check that their model was doing what it should be doing. They then scaled their algorithms for the whole of Africa, and they now have a conversation with countries in South America for something similar. So you can do this at scale. The UN has a platform for it already.
Great. Now there's a question for you, Clifton. How far does IMDA intend to take AI Verify? Are we going to see something similar to EU AI Act here soon?
So I am not a policy person, so I won't be able to answer the second part, or the second question. I think that for AI Verify, we have the intention, which I mentioned earlier, to add the generative AI testing soon. We intend to release it in May, which is in our flagship event, which is ATX. And we are also testing AI Verify with various partners. Either they are software vendors, they are insurance companies, banks. So we are doing more testing to integrate into their products, into their systems. Definitely we want to spend a lot more time and resource to bring AI Verify forward. There's also the beginnings of us working with other governments with AI Verify. So once we have a more concrete collaboration, we will make those announcements.
The questions that has the biggest vote here, I just wanted to mention that we did ask a question earlier, which is why I wasn't intentionally skipping it. But I think there is a question here that says, can you share any countries or companies which you view as having the best practice data ecosystem? Any point of view?
I'm biased. I would say Singapore. So, yeah.
So I'm going to say...
That's going to be interesting.
So I'm going to say it depends. I'm going to be very nuanced here. There are examples in the US where they've done it very well. There are examples in Germany where they've done it very well. A lot of it depends on the political will in the particular sector that you might be talking about. So the reason the UK has done energy well is the political will has been there. Do I think the UK is particularly good at health? I've got to be honest with you, no. I think the health ecosystems are much better executed in places like Germany and Switzerland for that matter. But then when it comes to things like retail, you have to look at what organizations like Walmart are doing in the US. So it's really context specific as where the best practice is. So it's quite difficult to compare.
Right. Well, that was a great answer from Clifton and Dan. Thank you very much. That must be a very candid question to put you on that spot. Now, thank you very much for both panelists. We've heard a lot from you tonight around what it's data ecosystem, and also the various, despite the different perspective that you both bring. More importantly, I think you also shared the real use cases that gives us that kind of hope that the value it brings for data ecosystem. Now, for the audience, if you are interested to learn more about what's going on globally in the data space, Clifton, you can share later as well if you have anything, but I would like to invite you to tune into Dan's Data Today podcast, which brings in very interesting fields and industry speakers around how they transform, how they actually work with data. And now it's in season 2 with the latest episode with the UK public sector, if I'm mistaken. Yeah, Dan?
So I think just to give you a flavour of the sorts of episodes, so Angie, thank you for shamelessly promoting me, but look, some of the episodes this season, the episode that went out yesterday is about the use of public data in the welfare system and how you improve the welfare system in the United Kingdom. One of the other episodes this season has been around the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and how monitoring stations around the world look for explosions. And actually we segued slightly into how you find submarines as well, which is part of it, because unsurprisingly it can be used to find things like submarines. And then we've also got a discussion on misinformation and disinformation in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. So there's some interesting conversations going on in there.
Yes, super interesting, and I think I would follow your podcast from now. IMDA, we would like to engage you on a deeper level. So you can come to our website, which is our activities calendar. And we have deep tech sharing sessions and other activities. The more recent one that's coming up is on 16th of March. We have an open house. And you have kids that are in university or looking for a job in the IT industry. Please come to our open house. Thank you.
Great, we have 2 very interesting gentlemen that has invited you. And now we will end the sessions for this evening and invite you to actually network with them as we speak. And please do join the podcast and join the IMD visit. Thank you. Thank you very much.